Deuteronomy 18. We're going to start in verse 9, and we're just going to do the rest of the chapter. So that is all we're going to do. So rather than read all the verses, I'll pray, and then we'll take a look. There's two sections we're going to look at. Both of them should have some interesting discussion, and we'll see what we can figure out from this from these two small passages. So let's pray. Dear Lord, we come to you today in Jesus' name. Lord, I pray you can help us to know your word, to learn from it, convict us where necessary, and lead us to want to make these principles that we learn real in our lives. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Chapter 9, you say?
Deuteronomy 18, starting in verse 9.
Oh.
So the book of Deuteronomy, remember, it's a sermon. It's a bunch of sermons that Moses gave with practical things that God's people need to know while they wait in their little holding pattern, waiting for the Messiah to come. And I mentioned before, if you think of what on earth Israel's job is, they're like an airplane circling the airport waiting for clearance to land. They're supposed to maintain their identity as God's people and live holy lives, representing him in everything they do, the way they run their country, the way their laws work, and the way they interact with each other, and the way they maintain fellowship with God by bringing sacrifices to show they love him, to show that they just want to have fellowship with him, to atone for their sins. They're supposed to just hold on while they wait for the Messiah to get there. So Deuteronomy is just a bunch of practical lessons from their context about how they're supposed to do that. So we have Deuteronomy 18, verses 9 to 14. These guys, they live in a world where if you wanted to hear from the gods, your gods, there's all sorts of weird rituals and signs and procedures you had to go through, like reading the entrails of dead animals or placating the gods by sacrificing your children and burn them alive in the fire, and all these things to make your gods happy and to hear from them. But that's not the way God works. God doesn't want us to murder our children. God doesn't want us to gaze into the entrails of animals or search the stars for astrological messages that tell us what God wants. He's given us what he wants in a book. So Moses wants them to know that they're not supposed to do the same things that the nations around them did. So that's where verses 9 to 14 come in. When you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominable practices of those nations. He doesn't say what they are, but he's getting toward that whole, not the sexual immorality thing, which is what he's been talking about, but he seems to be getting toward the idea of you don't need to do all these bizarre rituals to hear from God. You already know what he wants from you. Moses is reminding them what he wants from them. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or a charmer, or a medium, or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God. For these nations which you are about to dispossess, listen to fortune tellers and to diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do this.
We don't do that, so we can move on. Right?
Yeah, that's right. So where can we just go? So what should we do with this passage? What do we do with this? What does this mean for us? How would they be influenced by these practices, and how should they not be influenced? I mean, if they want to make sure they're not influenced by these practices, what should they do? And so as we think about the world around us and us not being influenced by the weird stuff that unbelievers do and think is fine, what should we do? So what do we do with this passage?
Pass it off as the Old Testament. We're in the New Testament now.
All right, what else should we do with this passage?
Okay, abortion. We don't deal with that.
Okay. He's not simply here's what my question is. This camera was supposed to turn to you while you were speaking, but it failed. So he's not simply, I don't want to talk about we shouldn't do abortion, because I don't think that's revolutionary.
That's too far. I mean, you're saying.
No, it is true. But why would they ever be tempted if God told them not to do it? How would they be tempted to start doing it? How would they be tempted to start consulting sorcerers or astrologers or people who read the entrails of animals to tell them what God wants them to do? How would they start to even care about this?
Because the other nations might seem more powerful than them, so they think that they're being aided by their gods.
Okay, think about your life and think about how this actually, how do you start to get influenced by pagan practices and thought patterns?
I was coming out of South America, a poor country, into a rich America, and I saw the technologies and all the things that were going on. I might be tempted to look into some of that, not knowing the dangers of it unless somebody told me.
Okay,
And I don't know how advanced Israel was at that time when they were coming into these different lands.
I think it comes down to just like Eve was deceived and she took the fruit from the tree of life. The tree of good and evil.
yeah,
And we all have that tendency to want to know what this experience is that you would want to perhaps dabble in it to find out what's going on. There's something inside us, our sin nature, that desires that.
I think that's true. Why would we start to want to be interested in this? Like, what causes that?
Not trusting God or his timing. And you see them possibly doing these things to get answers, instant answers. And so you go, okay, well, there's an instant answer for me. I'm going to go read this dead animals. Sneezes Kim produces.
3 sneezes, 1 for each person of the Trinity.
There's a spiritual thing to it.
I think it's just lack of trust in God
Okay.
and his timing.
Are you going to say something, Lucas?
I was thinking of, they might also think that they were, they were doing something, they might have assimilated the witchcraft practices into, worshiping God. They were kind of influenced by the people around them, so they kind of like, hey, here's another cool way to worship. Here's another cool way to worship God that everybody else seems to be doing with their God, so why don't we do it with ours, basically.
Yeah, I think it comes down to who you hang out with and what you allow to influence you in your life. Because I mean, if you think about real life, I think we really need to think, when we think about why did Israel do these things, we can run the risk of treating them as though they're cardboard people and not real people like us. Like if we say something like, Israel did this because they wanted to be more powerful. Is that the way it works in your life? Like when you know what God's word says, but then you start doing other things anyway, is it because you want to be more powerful? Or is it because maybe you're hanging out with the wrong people, reading the wrong things? You're not in community with other Christians, and your influences, the things that you allow to be the influencers in your life, start dragging you away from what God says, little by little, until eventually you're like 5 blocks away and you don't even know. I think that's the way most of us fall into things that we don't want to, is we have bad associations and it starts to influence us, and we get led away slowly and we don't even realize that it's happening.
Well, how much they knew. They may have, I could read it, but I don't truly understand it. So therefore, even though I can probably quote it, I don't practice it because I don't know how to practice it yet. But he's warning them. This seems pretty simple. They're just saying, don't do these things. Obviously, those are bad things, he's saying. So they haven't gone there yet, but they do go there. So again, I don't know how deep the understanding of the individual Jewish person is, even though they had celebrated all the festivals. It's kind of like celebrating Christmas and all these things. That knowing who God is, they had a form of religion that denied the power. type of thing.
Well, I mean, the things he talks about in, consulting charmers or mediums or necromancers or sorcerers, that stuff, they know what that is. That's from their culture. They know what the outside world does and the way the religious world works in their culture. So God doesn't need to explain all of that to them. They know what it means. So to port this over, there's a whole lot of things that go on in our culture that we know Christians shouldn't be a part of, that are opposed to God's word. But how many Christians are straddle the fence on a lot of those issues, either maybe because of pressure from their job or friends and family, or just because they're not really rooted in God's word and they start drifting off and they start redefining what the faith is to accommodate to what the world's doing out there. So it's not that we need to make sure we don't consult with sorcerers. I think we're all good on that point. But what are the evil things in our culture that Christians or read about are tempted to start accommodating to and still claim to be faithful Christians? And why would Christians start accommodating to the idea that that you can be an unrepentant practicing homosexual and still be a Christian? There's plenty of Christians who do have homosexual tendencies, who God saves and rescues, and they struggle with them their whole life, just like someone else might struggle with alcoholism. But to make that your identity and to give into it as your mark of identity, and to be a practicing drug addict or something and still claim to love God and not care about fighting with the Holy Spirit to eradicate that from your life, you would say, well, that person isn't a very faithful Christian, if he even is a Christian, because you should be fighting against it. It shouldn't be something you embrace as part of your Christianity. Those two things don't mix. It's like peanut butter and spaghetti. It's like those things, they don't go, and they're not meant to go. So, but why are there so many Christians who just are caving on God's sexual ethics? Not that you have to keep fighting, but that it's all okay. It's because their culture is more of an influence than God's word is at that point. It's not that they want more power. It's not that it's not always some big thing. It's just that the things that are influencing their heart and mind, the things outside God's word are more of a powerful influence than the things inside God's word.
Well, as a believer, we've been warned, about television. You say, well, I have a channel, I can change it. But you come across commercials and you're watching something, and all of a sudden there's two guys kissing. That's an image now, it's in your head.
Yeah.
And this constant bombardment of things like that coming at you, that you think, well, I won't watch that, I won't watch those kinds of programs, but if you're watching, you're still going to be exposed to things like that. And, murder and all the other things that come along. And one thing I've noticed through the years is there's just a whole lot more shoot 'em up, bangs, killing, murders, rape, sex, and all this stuff on almost every show. Some kind of superhero killing mess of people. And somehow, if you watch enough of that, it can kind of carry over, even if you're a believer, to not going and killing somebody, but who knows how that affects your mind. And somebody had told me one time that the television is kind of a portal for Satan to get to your family. Even watching some of the Disney stuff that we used to watch as kids has gotten pretty weird. And this is what we're watching. And so we're feeding our minds with the Bible on Sunday, and during the week we're watching probably programs that we didn't think were going to be bad, but all this stuff is being pumped into your mind. So you have this battle going on between, should I even be watching this stuff, or any of it for that matter, the news, everything. Well, so there's that bombardment that's coming at you.
Yeah, you're right. It's not just television; it's internet, and anything that you allow to influence you can start. Any medium, print, digital, whatever. If you consume it a lot, it's going to start influencing who you are and the way you think. So, what are the big vehicles in your life that shape who you are? If it's not God and His Word, and the Christian, the little church you're a part of, the community of God, being under the word and wanting to orient our lives toward that, having him change us, then it's going to be something else. And if you go back to Deuteronomy and you're like, well, why on earth would these idiots ever do that when they know it's wrong? Who would kill their daughter in the fire? You need to look at these, you need to look at your own life and think about real people in real situations and not like cardboard people. There are plenty of young women who get abortions and they don't want to, but they feel they have no choice. It's not that they're just cartoon evil people. It's they feel they have no choice. They feel stuck. They've been abandoned by losers who got them pregnant, who run away, or for a million other reasons or a combination. These are real people and they're influenced by real situations in their lives where they feel stuck or trapped. And the reason why a decision was made was probably because other things instead of God and his word were the drivers of influence in their lives. So when we read a passage like this, we need to think of our own lives and what's going on in our own culture. There's no sorcery, at least not in the West. You know, we don't have to worry about sorcerers on the street corner here or anywhere. We have our own problems, but those problems can still subtly start influencing us in the same way that Israelites can do these practices and then turn around and offer a sacrifice to the priest in the temple and think everything's good. And you're like, well, how could you do that? Well, one step at a time.
Swarming the frog.
Yeah, the frog and the kettle thing where the temperature's slowly turned up and he boils to death and doesn't realize it, you know, because he just acclimated and it just gets warmer and warmer. And he's never had boiled frog, but maybe it tastes good. Like so this brings a question as we think about how Israel was supposed to do this, and then we think about us. There's a line in our doctrinal statement that reflects our church's heritage from a Baptist fundamentalist organization that broke away from the Northern Baptist Convention. And it's called Separation. It's one line. It says, we believe in obedience to the biblical commands to separate ourselves to God from worldliness and ecclesiastical apostasy. And all that means is we believe that we should not be worldly people. We should be holy people who reflect God and not our culture. And we need to make sure we have nothing to do with other churches or other Christian organizations that are going down the wrong road. We don't want to partner with them to do things. And this kind of thing, if you see this thing in a doctrinal statement about separation, we need to be separate from the world. Come out from among them and be ye separate, says the Lord. It's probably, not always, but it's probably going to be some sort of church with a fundamentalist background. And fundamentalist doesn't always mean legalistic. You don't see that thing in a doctrinal statement from many churches today. It's considered like archaic. But is that a bad concept? I mean, is that bad?
Well, there are some Christian organizations that take it to extreme that you don't live around non-Christians and that you don't associate with non-Christians. But if you don't take it to that extreme and you're still sharing the gospel with people and you're still rubbing shoulders with them, because how is a non-Christian going to come to Christ if he's not around Christians?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I had that experience in witnessing to the religions.
Mhm.
You say, well, we're not supposed to talk to you. You know, that's what they're telling them. And I'm thinking, well, that's why, and then ask them why and to get into it. But you got to talk to people and find out where they're coming from and what your word says versus theirs.
Yeah.
So it's pretty hard not to, in a sense you're fellowshipping, but you're also trying to get to know who the person is and why they believe that way, and hopefully not go their way.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, how do you do that? Where's the line between I want to be separate from the world and not be influenced by it, but yet I'm not going to reach anyone for Christ unless I actually move and live around and, have contact with other people. So how do you do that? And we can't solve the question here, but I mean, it's something that we need to think about. Are we being influenced more by our culture or more by God's word? And you can think of the common flashpoint issues, especially around sexual ethics. Are we being influenced to buy our culture, to start shaving away what God says to be more accommodating? Are we trying to be loving, or are we really just giving in and not wanting to admit to ourselves why we think the way we do? So how do you be faithful to God without building a monastery in the hills and hiding from everyone? How do you not do that? But how do you also not be the guy who, or the gal who doesn't even look like a Christian and just keeps saying, well, I need to be like these people to witness to them? You know, how do you be in the world but not of the world?
I think it varies from person to person, like how rooted in God's word you are, how far along you are.
I know what to do. Don't dance and everything will be great. Like, that's an example, right? That's an example. We can't ever dance because dancing is bad and it makes people think sexual thoughts. So it must be bad. And if you dance, you're a compromiser and you don't believe in being holy.
You can't have the cross. It's down.
It's down. So I mean, that I like stuff like that. Like, you can't. I knew a pastor in Illinois who would not go into a restaurant that served alcohol. So that meant he just went to McDonald's, because he felt that the McDonald's employee agrees, because he felt that if people knew he's a Christian and if he was in an establishment that sold alcohol, that people would then think that he was endorsing alcohol. So in order to not make people think that he agrees with drinking, he would not ever go anywhere that served alcohol. And I remember asking him, do you go to Walmart? And then he got mad and didn't speak to me anymore. But I mean, we all know the funny stories of people who just like, they're like one step away from building a monastery in the hills, cutting into internet. But we also know people who don't seem to really care about living godly lives. We don't want to be either of those.
Oh,
Sorry.
I was just saying that guy, he was talking about how you draw a line between how much, like, spending time in the world witnessing to people and staying away from the world and from worldly influences and that sort of thing. And where's the line there? And I said it varies from person to person, like how far along you are in your spiritual journey. How, like, if you're a new Christian or you're like been a Christian for a long time, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And what about the different degrees of faith people have, or their different gifts, their different strengths, their different, that kind of plays into how it works out.
Yeah. Like, I think it does. I think it does vary from person. I think everyone needs to evaluate his own life and think, am I being influenced by culture in a way that's subtly leading me away from God? I think all of us have experienced situations where we take stock of our life or some situation and we're like, I need to stop doing this because it's resulting in bad things in my life. And I think this is a constant self-check that we need to be doing on ourselves. Because we could read Deuteronomy and say, well, that's simple. Don't burn your children in fire. Got it. Moving on. But the only reason why they'd ever do that is because step by step, they become acclimated to their culture to the point where you can do things that are just so crazy to an outsider, but they're so used to it, it doesn't seem like a big thing. Like, is the debate about sexual ethics, about identity, whether you're a man or a woman, is it really that hard? I mean, is it really hard to know what you are? And we can talk all the good things about, how you were raised and what it means to be what does it actually mean to act like a man versus what it doesn't, or to act like a woman and what it doesn't. Do all girls have to play with Barbies? Or if you don't play with a Barbie, are you not really so you can talk about all of the good psychological stuff, and you can talk about all of that. But in the end, is it really difficult to know what God made you as? It's not hard, but our culture makes it hard. It makes it very hard. And now there is and there's going to continue to be tons of just endless agonizing discussion about what it means to be a man or a woman, and whether it's fixed at birth, and whether transgenderism is a legitimate category. And Christians are going to get all caught up in it and have there's a whole book over there on the table thing over there what does God say about transgenderism? Why is it necessary to write this book? Because culture is coming in, ungodly culture is coming in, and Christians have questions and they're getting confused. Whereas 100 years ago, if you would have told someone 100 years ago, how many of you think this sentence would have made sense? If in 1921, someone came up to you and said, I feel like I'm a woman trapped in a man's body. In 1921, do you think anyone would even know what to do with that sentence? Because to us, even if you don't want to be, you're acclimated to know exactly where that's coming from, and to immediately you're like, okay. But that sentence makes no sense. It's only our culture that's made us think, well, this is very complicated. It's complicated because people are being hurt by it and are confused, but it's really not complicated. So culture does influence us, even when we don't want it to.
This latest is men being attracted to children. Seen that?
Yes, I saw
And
that.
all this stuff started
Yeah.
out with the homosexuals and legalizing that. There was a warning that if you open this door, you can open it to all these other things, and sure enough, that's exactly what's happened.
And the churches have had major problems with dealing with this issue. Instead of dealing with people people are messed up. And sometimes that messed upness results in drug abuse, alcohol abuse. Maybe you're just a real jerk. Maybe you abuse your spouse. And sometimes it results in deviant sexual desires too. So it's one symptom of being messed up in this broken world. But churches have not done a good job with ministering to people who deal with this. They sort of kick them to the curb or shut them away. Or 10 years or so ago, they would pass, they added something to their doctrinal statement about how marriage is between men and women. And then they would say, well, we're done. We settled that issue. And you've really settled nothing. You're just like putting up walls. You're not trying to reach anybody. So the church has been not done well with addressing this issue in a compassionate way. But all the compassion in the world won't change the fact that it's not a difficult subject. So culture does influence us. So this is my question. Was Israel supposed to be evangelistic, or were they supposed to bottle themselves up?
They were supposed to be evangelistic. They were supposed to be like an example to the other nations about this is what a godly nation looks like.
Were they supposed to be active evangelists where they go out and tell people the gospel, or were they just supposed to be good examples when people would be like, oh, those guys know something, maybe I should ask? Like passive, just a witness passively, or actively, you need to know Yahweh and his promise that Messiah is going to come? What are they supposed to have done?
I think it was passive.
Passive. Okay. What do you guys think? What do you guys think? Because there's two tendencies. Tendency one, when they came back from exile, they bottled themselves up, and they over 400 years or so, by the time Jesus's day came, a lot of the Pharisees and scribes had taught generations of kids to have nasty attitudes about anyone who's not Jewish, and there seemed to be no desire to reach out to tell them about the Messiah who's coming, to make them Jews, like nothing, like the nasty attitude like Peter had, like, I can't even talk to you, I can't even associate with you. And Jesus is like, what? Because Jesus didn't have that attitude.
Do you think it was God meant it for them to be separate from those people, but they, in their sin, took it to be more like hatred and disgust and despising of other people that weren't like them? That wasn't God's intent.
Well, when they came back from exile, I think they wanted to make sure they followed the rules. And so they were really careful about trying to make sure they follow the rules, but they ended up being legalists instead. I guess, my question is, when you think of Mount Sinai, when God brought them there and he gave them the law and he set them on their course and they went in the promised land, were they supposed to then go reach people with the gospel, or were they just supposed to stay like turtles, self-contained, waiting? Because when you look at Deuteronomy's, this passage about, don't be influenced by the way these other guys do it. Well, it's easy to not be influenced. Just cut yourself off from them and build up some walls. Hide away, no contact. How do you think God wanted them to respond? The no contact option. Let's hide away from them. Don't speak to them. don't talk to them, little contact as humanly possible? Or were they supposed to be missionary, like Paul was? Are there examples in the Old Testament of like missions?
Well,
Jonah.
if you go to.
Jonah, yeah,
If you go to the book of Ruth,
yeah,
Naomi was married to a Moabite,
yep,
and she talked to her daughters-in-laws about it because Ruth came back with her. So that would be an example of an outreach.
yeah. Naomi wasn't supposed to marry someone. Naomi, who's married to a Moabite. I know her son was married to Ruth. But anyway, you weren't supposed to marry an unbeliever, first of all. So that wasn't God's heart. I don't know about Naomi off the top of my head, but I know Naomi's son was married to Ruth, who was not a believer in the beginning. So that wasn't supposed to have happened, but it did. Surprise, surprise. People don't always do what God says. It's a good thing none of us have that problem. But we have Jonah. How did the Jonah thing go? I mean,
Turned out okay.
God wanted Jonah to go, right? He literally told him to go. So there's some place in God's heart for active missionary work to the Assyrians. They're nasty people. It's like ISIS. They're not good people, but God wanted to reach them.
I don't think Lot had much influence in his society.
Lot's an example of Lot should have just bailed on that a long time ago.
Well, he was warned about that part of the country when he chose it. And he moved closer until he's in the city, sitting in the wall. That's the way it was explained to me anyway, that it was by degree. He kept moving closer until finally he's in the city and he's absorbed in it.
Yeah, Lot is a really good example of someone who, it's like he's not even horrified by the practices of the town. Like he knows it's bad. He tries to get the guys who are the angels to get out of the street. But it's like he's just accepted as a normal thing. He's not horrified. He lives there voluntarily. Crazy. But he's just been acclimated. So it's not a big deal to him anymore, even if he doesn't agree with it, So Lot's a really good example of how you can just be warped by your culture, still believing the right things, but you're just.
He referred to it as a righteous Lot. His heart was vexed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wondered about that. Especially he loses his whole family and then his daughters do their weird thing.
His daughters do their weird thing. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, there's nobody around.
So your question about being insular or evangelistic, from what verse are you asking us to consider that?
I'm asking a question from the implication. How are you supposed to, if you read Deuteronomy 18, 9 to 14, and you see that you're not supposed to do these things, there's two ways that you can make sure you don't do those things. You can either wall yourself off from everybody, or you can try and be in the world but not of the world. And so the question that I had was, do you think Israel was supposed to be evangelistic and reach out, or were they just supposed to wall themselves away to make sure they didn't get polluted by anybody?
Weren't they supposed to welcome people who had come to them, the foreigners? People obviously knew about them because as they went in to Jericho, people knew that they were coming. They were out there, and so the foreigners knew of them.
You heard about their God too.
Yeah.
Is verse 20 talking about foreigners when it says countrymen?
Chapter 18, verse 20?
Are we in 17?
No, we're in 18. That's why you've looked confused the whole time. I'm sorry. Yeah, 18 verses 9 to 14. Sorry. Okay, so yeah, I just wanted us to think about because we still have the same as we wrap up here. I don't think we're going to get to the last part of the chapter, but okay. So we know we're supposed to not be influenced by the world. Okay, that's easy to say, but it happens. We're told here in chapter 18, verses 9 to 14, they're told not to be influenced by the world around them in these particular ways too. And we can sit here and say, well, of course you shouldn't burn your child alive or consult sorcerers. What boneheads. But that was their problem. We have our own issues in culture today that we can be influenced by. And when we think about how easily we, as individuals and as a church, can be influenced by the world's morality, we can start to realize that this is not a simple thing. It's not a simple, got it, no problem, moving on. We can really be influenced and shaped by our culture without even realizing it step by step. That's why it's necessary for people to write entire books about what does God say about transgenderism. 100 years ago, they would have said, it's wrong. Any questions? But now we have to write books about it because the culture is going that way. And so Christians have real questions and real confusion in their own hearts and minds and based on friends and family and coworkers they know. So if culture does influence us, then how do we stay separate from the world, but yet be evangelistic? How do you do those two things? And that's why we had a short discussion about that, which led me to then say, do you think Israel was supposed to be evangelistic, or do you think they're just supposed to seal themselves up in Ziploc bags? So there's passages in Isaiah 42 and 49, passages about prophecies about this God's servant, who's Jesus. And over he talks about how he's going to be a light to the nations. He's going to gather people from all over the place. God's heart has always been for his people to reach out with a message to bring them in. When we think about missions, we usually think about the Apostle Paul. We don't usually think about the Old Testament, or if we do, we just say Jonah and call it good. But it's interesting to think about, was Israel supposed to be more evangelistic than it was? Because you don't see much evangelism going on, like active evangelism. There was Jonah and he didn't want to go. And God had to go to these extreme lengths to get him to realize that he needed to go give the gospel to the Assyrians. So it's an interesting question to think about. Should they have been more evangelistic?
I think they were I think they were just supposed to be passive evangelists, except in certain circumstances or special cases like Jonah, because he talks over and over again about being an example to the nations, living a good, acting godly, so that the other nations around will praise God. It doesn't really say anything specific about going out telling other people about it. In fact, he says to wipe out all the other nations when they come in and everything.
That's only those 7.
Yeah, but I think he didn't tell them to be insular, but he told them it seems like it's more of a passive evangelism focus.
Yeah, whether it's active or passive, any believer in any age has to deal with the question of how do I reach a culture and yet not be ruined by it?
Seems like the big change came in Jesus' birth of the church, then evangelism began, versus the Jews and what they had, because like you say, they were pretty well warned to stay away from all these other things.
We're warned too.
Yeah, but we're more active in our sharing of faith versus them.
Is that because they weren't? Is that because they didn't have to be, or because they were disobedient? Like when God says they have to, He's made them a kingdom of priests in Ezekiel 19, and a holy nation, a kingdom of priests. That's the same thing Peter says that we are in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. We think we're supposed to be evangelists. That's what Jesus told us to do. Was Israel supposed to have been doing that the whole time?
Well, it seems like it, because when he turned to the Gentiles, it's kind of like the Jews rejected, and so God turned to the Gentiles. Now the Gentiles were all excited because they had all this new teaching. And I remember when Peter was with the other apostles, and they were trying to decide, well, what do we tell these people to do as far as their faith? He didn't say anything about going to the temple on the Sabbath. Didn't tell them to keep the Sabbath. He says, don't drink the blood, don't things It almost would have been strangled. Kind of minor stuff. You think there'd be a whole lot of rules they would try to pass on to the new Christians versus, what the Jews were doing. So it's quite a change there when the church became the church versus the Jews. And of course, most of the Jewish leaders were corrupt anyway. So they're not probably getting very good teaching.
Yeah.
Maybe there were some good ones, but most of them were corrupt.
Were you going to say something, Kim?
Verse 18, when it says, I will raise up a prophet from among their countrymen like you, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them. Who's he talking about? Them. Is he talking about the foreigners or Israelites? I will speak to them all that I commanded him. I mean, so that's where I see, that's the only place I see that he's talking about speaking to the foreigners. If that is indeed who he's talking about when he says that.
Well, who's the prophet?
Jesus.
The prophet's Jesus. We'll talk about that next week. Yeah, that's interesting. Who exactly is, who does Jesus speak to? I mean, Jesus speaks to everybody. I mean, we're his messengers and we're giving the same message. He sent us to go preach the word to everybody. So,
That woman at the well,
yeah,
and she's saying, why are you talking to me? I'm a woman, number one. Number two, the Jews don't talk to us. So.
well, that was the Jews at that time didn't, because they were not racist, but a lot of them didn't like Gentiles. That's why they didn't talk to them. Not because God told them not to, but because they had a nasty attitude about everyone who wasn't Jewish.
There again.
Well, the Samaritans were half-breeds, right?
Yeah. But who cares?
Well, Israel, the purebreds cared.
Should they have cared?
No. Well, I don't know. If you read Nehemiah and Ezra, there was a big thing where people married outside of the family and caused a big problem.
That's true. There was a huge thing in Ezra and Nehemiah where they'd come back from exile, and then we'll wrap up in a moment. They came back from exile and they married a whole bunch of pagan. The men and women all married pagans and foreigners. Was the problem that they married foreigners, or is the problem that they married unbelievers who happened to be foreigners? It's not that they were not from Israel. It's the fact they weren't believers. Ruth wasn't from Israel. She became a believer and was welcomed right in. So this question of don't do these things these people do, and we could have just blown right past it, etc. But anytime, if you're going to be in contact with the world to give the gospel, then you need to seriously think about how is the culture influencing me to drift away from God. And if you say, well, it's not, well, then that's not true. You're not thinking hard enough, because it is. That's why there's a 100-page book about what to think about transgenderism, because a lot of Christians are confused because the culture's moving them instead of God's word. So essentially, this lesson is to make us think about how do we be separate from the world, but still be in the world enough to be salt and light and to give the gospel to the world without being corrupted by it. And that's a perennial issue and problem. You can go one way and wall yourself off and never have any contact with people, or have a nasty attitude toward everyone and a posture of just defensiveness and anger, which is the way some Christians have chosen to go. And they just preach to themselves and sit in their buildings and seem to just hate everybody and everything in the world, and just are waiting for the Jesus escape pod to get out of here so the space can be burned. So you have that. And the other side are the Christians who don't seem to care at all about being holy people and representing Christ at all, like at all. So there has to be a middle ground. And the perennial question is, how do we do that? And it's still a question that's with us today.
I have a question.
Yes.
There's one passage in Mark that I've always kind of wondered about. It's like that one with the Syrophoenician woman, where he kind of compares her to like a dog eating from the Jews' table.
Yeah.
That seems sort of nasty. I mean, he's probably
Yeah.
talking about Transgenderism, but it seems sort of nasty attitude in that.
Yeah, you're talking about his comment to the Syrophoenician woman. I have a really good answer for that. I just have to look back at my notes to remember what I believe about. I don't off the top of my head. I don't remember what I had to say about that. I could lie. But.
Because it seems like in other circumstances, he's very open, you know, he talks to the centurion, he talks to the Samaritan and everything and says that they can have living water as well, but,
Yeah,
and this just doesn't seem in character for Jesus.
I think he was, okay, we're at Mark 7, verse 24. He's in Tyre and Sidon, so he's outside of Israel. He's talking to a Gentile woman. Mark 7:25. Immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. The woman was a Gentile, Syrophoenician by birth. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter, and he said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs," which is not very nice. But she answered, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And he said to her, "For this statement you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." She went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. I have to look again. I think my best guess on that one is that he's being deliberately provocative to see how she's going to react to it for some reason. I don't remember why. But I do know, if you think about what's Jesus's heart for Gentiles, in Matthew 8, 5-12, you have a centurion who comes to him and says, can you heal, is it his daughter or his servant? His servant, okay. Can you heal this guy? And he says, yeah, I'll come with you. And the centurion says, no, you don't need to come. You can just say the word and I know it'll be taken care of. You command angelic forces. You don't need to physically be there. You can make it happen without being there. And Jesus says, I've never seen any faith like this before, not even in Israel. And he says, there's plenty of people who come from the east and the west, north and south, Gentiles from all over the globe. They're going to come, they're going to sit at the master's table. And there's plenty of sons of the kingdom, Jewish people, they're going to end up in hell. It's like there's plenty of people just like you who aren't Jews, but who believe in the gospel, the good news that I'm the king, I've come to fix everything. And they're going to be in the kingdom. But plenty of people, the people who should know most, there's plenty of Jewish people, they're going to be in outer darkness. The tables will be flipped. So Jesus has a real heart for the Gentiles, which makes Peter's nasty comments in Acts 10 all the more weird.
Yeah, because of the Great Commission that Jesus came before he left.
Yeah. But Peter's an example of how culture can warp how we think about God. Peter really believed he couldn't associate with a Gentile, but he spent 3 years with Jesus as he associated with Gentiles. You know, culture can do weird things to the way we read scripture. And we can start to think God has said something, and then you're like, he never said it. In fact, he said the opposite. So why do you think that? And then you're like, oh, guess you're right. So culture does do weird things to the way we think. And so I don't know how to answer your question. I'll figure it out. I'll talk to you later. It's a hard question. I think he was being deliberately provocative to see what her response would be for reasons that he knew, but as he spoke to her, but I don't know. But as we read Deuteronomy 18, and then we'll be done, it's not cardboard. People really do get influenced by their culture, but yet we have to be evangelistic. And so we have to find a way to do that without being warped by the world around us. And it's not a dead issue from Deuteronomy that we don't need to care about. It's real today. It's the same struggle.